This is the Vercel Ship landing page, which you can find at vercel.com and then /ship. So this has been launched for Vercel's upcoming conference, and it hits on a lot of things that I really like about web design. So I'm going to go through and point out some details, even though it's, because first of all, it's a very simple visual style, but they've done a few things to make it more visually interesting than if they just kept it the black and white that it could have been. So you can see here these lines. Hopefully the video compression doesn't ruin those. But one of my favorite patterns in visual design is visible structure. So you take the layout structure of the page and you make it more visible in some way, more explicit. In this case, they've got lines that sort of mark out the margins of the page. A pretty standard line that divides the page from the main navigation here. But they've also got this hierarchy of dividers, and I'll go through those in a second. First of all, this hero section, this sets up, well, first of all, they've got some interesting hover interactions, but this also sets up a visual theme throughout the website where they take letters or numbers and they remove chunks of them, so you're only seeing part of them. So for this S, they've taken away the bottom of the S. Same for this H, the bottom left corner, same for this I, and so on. What's quite nice about this is that you can do interesting things with layout. So you can see they've taken the S here and they've shifted it down, but they've kept some space below it because they've taken away the bottom of the S, and that gives them space to show this main call to action. One thing I find great here, by the way, is when you hover over these things, they sort of fully turn into these dots, these atoms, let's say. But on the buttons, they made sure to have this sort of reserved area behind the text so that when you hover over those, you're not losing the thing that's most important, the thing that you might want to read. So yeah, they've got this here, and they've changed the height that each of these letters start at. So you can see here the S starts at a certain level, the H starts higher. The I probably would have started higher if they hadn't taken away the top chunk of it, and that the P starts even lower than the S. So this is nice sort of curve effect. And that means they can create these empty spaces to fit things in. So the button fits in the empty space created by the S. This description of the conference fits in the space created by the high H and the high I, which spells high. So that's probably a coincidence, but quite clever if someone saw that H and I spell high and then moved it higher on the page. I also quite like that they included the smallest piece of information, which is the location and date, as essentially a dot over the I. So this fits in with the letters they're using, and I assume that's not a coincidence that they put a dot over the I essentially. So the hierarchy of dividers I was talking about, you've got these hard dividers that are solid lines. Then down here you've got these dotted dividers. And so these are used between sections to show that each of these sections is related, more related than this center section to this margin section, which has nothing in it. So because they've got this hierarchy of dividers, they're giving you some subtle clues about how things are connected or grouped, and that's quite nice. It's also a good sort of flexible system you can use throughout the website based on simple principles, but it adds that much more depth. At the intersections, so they've got these relatively subtle hard dividers, the relatively subtle dotted dividers, though because they're dotted, I'd say that the more visual interest, they draw the attention more. So they're a bit easier to notice and look at than the subtle dividers here. They might also be slightly brighter, but it's hard to tell. But at those dotted dividers, they've also got these intersection points, which come in. They're quite bright, but they're very small. So they're not really drawing your attention, but they're helping to reinforce this division across the page. You can see down here the coming soon sort of placeholders, but also the confirmed speakers are created using this dithering effect. And so that's using dots in different densities to show brightness or lack thereof. And this matches or pairs nicely with the effect applied to the text here. So even though this is a headline and it's a hover interaction and this is a static illustration, they're both using similar visual language in terms of these black and white dots, which is a nice way to include different elements so they feel sort of more varied throughout the website. So the website itself feels more varied, but also make them feel coherent because everything's made up of these dots. That also ties in quite nicely with the dotted line between sections, although I suppose these are more dashes, but it's as dotted as it needs to be. Again, with the dotted outlines around these images, so they've used this very simple visual language in inventive ways throughout the website. Oh, you can see here when you hover over one of these, it highlights the person in the list on the left. That's nice. So here we get to potentially the first problem with the sort of part letter approach, which I really like as an approach, but you have to be careful in terms of clarity. So I've looked at this website, 3 or 4 times now. I still don't know what this says. I assume that this is a D, an O, an S, a P, and an S. I don't know what order I'm supposed to read these in or what they stand for, if anything. Because I know that DOSPS isn't a word, and DPSSOP, I don't think that's a word. So I assume they have some meaning, but I'm not sure what it is. And so that's one of the risks of doing this sort of approach, is that someone will take a bit longer to understand it. And it could be in this case that you don't really need to understand it because the important information is still here in the text. But this really grabs the attention because it's big, it's bold, it's in your face. And so I think people will stop and try to figure it out and maybe get slightly frustrated that they can't. So down here, we've got sort of the next level down of the hierarchy of dividers. So here you've got this full width, and they reinforce that with these intersection points. Down here, you've got these part width. So they don't reach the full width, so they don't have the intersection points. They're still dotted, but because they're sort of in slightly, they reinforce the fact that these aren't as strong as these full width dividers. And so that, again, that's a nice sort of next level down of the hierarchy to separate out this list. I like this combination of the big headline and the smaller text. It looks good in this list, and it makes this list format, which would have been quite plain otherwise, a lot more visually interesting, along with the numbers here. Now again, I can tell this is a 01, a 07, a 04, and a 03. I'm not sure why those are there unless they are the dates. But if they were the dates of the month that these sessions are starting on, you wouldn't have 1, 7, then 4, then 3, because that's dates go in order. So again, I'm not clear on what these mean, and again, it might not be important. So this left and right layout reminds me of this sort of left and right layout. You've got this slight grid on the right and then a button on the left. And that's not particularly, worth pointing out, but it just jumped out at me. Next up, you can see they've got a different intersection here. So before it was dots, and now it's these sort of photo frame corners. Still the same divider, but they've got them down here as well. And actually, this is a very subtle way to reinforce that this section is more important than these. So before it was just showing you where the dividers were intersecting the margins. Now they're essentially framing it, and they haven't done much more. You can see that it's still the same outline, it's still the same dividers. But just with the addition of these photo frame corners, they've reinforced that this section is more important. I mean, they've also reinforced it with these giant numbers reversed on white, so that really does most of the work. The fact that it's centered as well, and the fact that they've put this text around, which sort of matches the idea of the photo frame corners, so that's a nice layout. Those things all reinforce that it's an important section of the website, but I like that they've included this subtle detail of changing the intersection sort of breakpoints as well. And again, another important section, again, this is really reinforced by the massive call to action in the center. Another chance to play with this sort of atom effect, and they've still kept the reserve space behind the text. But that's quite nice. They've fit the text to the container, or fit the container to the text, and still done the photo frame corners. And then you can see they don't have them again for the FAQ. So they've got the corner here. These ones up here, they continue down into the next section if that next section is important. Here it's quite nice. They've stopped the photo frame corner and down at the bottom here. So that's a subtle indication that this next FAQ section is not as important as the get tickets call to action, is not as important as the section after it. And then finally is the, not quite a call to action, but the sort of footer, and they're highlighting the company that's behind the conference. So again, they've treated that as an important section, along with some links you might want to click on, which have some quite interesting sort of glitchy hover effects.